Nowadays we got smartphones and everything else, but back in the day, 1990, there was no internet in your pocket, no YouTube, no streaming. More than likely you were probably just a kid holding a big gray brick, the Nintendo Gameboy. Now this screen is tiny, it's black and white, but in that moment, none of that mattered, because inside the little machine was something epic. Double Dragon for the Game Boy. The sound start, we're treated with the classic scene of Marion being punched in the gut, and suddenly, you're not in the backseat of a car anymore, you're in the middle of a street fight. Today we got a quick review of Double Dragon for the Game Boy, a handheld version of a legendary arcade game that fought its way into fans' heart one punch at a time. So let's rewind the clock and see what made this game such a knockout. Now Double Dragon first hit arcades in 1987, and it hit hard. Developed by Technos Japan, it was a spiritual successor to another beat 'em up called Renegade. And when I say spiritual, I don't mean sequel, I just mean same style of gameplay. But Double Dragon took things to the next level. You played as Billy and Jimmy Lee, or Spike and Hammer in the arcade, on a mission to rescue Billy's girlfriend Marion from a gang of street punks called the Black Warriors. And at that time, it had everything. 2-player co-op, whips, bats, cool enemy designs, urban style levels that felt like an 80s action movie. And the game was a hit worldwide. Naturally, it got ported to consoles and computers, the NES, Sega Master System, Atari, Commodore 64, you name it, Double Dragon was there. But in 1990, something new happened. Double Dragon came to the Game Boy, Nintendo's brand new handheld console. Portable gaming was still a wild experiment at the time, and the developers had a challenge. How do you take an arcade classic like Double Dragon and make it work on a tiny black and white screen? So unlike the arcade version, the Game Boy port wasn't just a copy and paste job. This was a complete reimagining of the NES game. In this version, you only play as Billy Lee. Jimmy isn't present, not even as a final boss like the NES version, and there's no co-op. This was a solo mission. The cool thing here though is you do start off with all your moves. Unlike the NES Big Brother, you don't have to unlock anything. Your whole move set is available right from the jump. Now the stages in this game were linear, but they did vary. You fought through city streets filled with punks and thugs, a forest filled with traps and tight spaces, underground caves with tricky jumps, and a gang hideout filled with the elite enemies and the final boss. And the enemy AI in this game is surprisingly aggressive. They just don't stand there while you beat up one of their homies. They'll rush you, gang up on you, even when you got somebody in the famous knee bash hold. Best strategy for this game, learn spacing. And the elbow smash is not OP like it was in the arcade, even though it is available to you. Even though it's a short game, about 20 to 30 minutes, it's still packed with action from start to finish. There's really no short breaks in between. So let's talk visuals. The Game Boy had a serious hardware limit. No color, limited processing power, and a tiny resolution. But Double Dragon did an amazing job working with what it had. Billy's sprite is huge and detailed. His walk animations is smooth, and his punches, they actually feel pretty heavy. And the enemies are all unique. Some carry bats, others just charge at you fist first, and so forth. And each stage has its own visual theme, even if it is just shades of gray. And the backgrounds, while simple, they give the game a gritty rundown vibe. I always thought that was perfect for the Game Boy. With some of the games just being black and white, it did get that gritty vibe. Perfect for a street brawler. And the transition between stages are actually pretty snappy. No load screens, just straight back into the fight. Now the music in Double Dragon is one of the unsung heroes of this port. Composed by the Game Boy's limited sound chip, the tracks are actually energetic, catchy, and surprisingly layered. The title screen music gets you hyped immediately, you know it's Double Dragon, and the stage themes are going to be very familiar to you if you played the NES version. Because let's be honest, this was basically what this game was based off of. Not a complete port, but most of the inspiration for this game came from the NES version of Double Dragon. And the sound effects are typical for a Game Boy game, the punches, kicks, jumps, etc, etc. And honestly, it's pretty incredible how much atmosphere they created with the Game Boy's limited sound chip. And if you're playing with headphones, you might actually get a pretty good experience here. The stereo separation helps bring each sound to life. Now, let's talk about the difficulty. Make no mistake, Double Dragon on Game Boy is challenging, but not for the reasons you think. I mean, obviously the early levels are easy as you come into the game, but as you reach the cave and the final hideout, things get serious. And the reason for this is not because the game is so hard, it's just because it being a Game Boy game, certain parts when you jump across the platforms, it doesn't scroll like as smooth as an NES game would do or a console game would do. So you actually end up dying because of just, I won't say poor programming, I'll just say because of deprogramming. So you actually fall quite a bit, and you only get so many men in this game and then it's game over. Also, there is a challenging part also with that. When you get to the top and you fight a Bobo where you got to jump over and the bridge is kind of like collapsing. That fight can be challenging because you can get knocked from your first jump right off the edge. So What sucks is that's so far into the game and you can actually lose your lives pretty quick, not because the game beats you, but just the circumstantial parts the game puts you in. So that's what makes the game challenging. Outside of that, the game is pretty much a cakewalk. So let's talk about some of the differences from this version to the other versions. Now, most ports of Double Dragon kind of copy the arcade game. The NES version added some new ideas, but stayed, somewhat on track. I won't say close, but somewhat on track. So let's talk about the Game Boy version, and it even went its own way from the NES. One difference was, well, one of the similarities was there's no co-op in this one like the NES Big Brother. However, Jimmy doesn't even make an appearance in the game, so he's not the last boss. The NES had a level up system, so you can unlock your moves as you go, but this one starts you right out the gate with everything you're gonna need to kick butt. And some of the new design levels are unique to the Game Boy. And be honestly, I feel like the Game Boy had a smarter combat flow as opposed to the NES Big Brother, and it encouraged a little more strategy as opposed to button mashing. So it feels like, they both had their strengths and weaknesses. Another part, just small subtle changes that they put in this Game Boy Double Dragon version was the Lindas look different. The Lindas kind of look more on par with the arcade, with the NES port, but on this version, they actually look a little risque. They got tight mini skirts, high heels, and they look like badasses of the night, if you will. But at the same time, they also got new abilities. In this version, Linda can do drop kicks. In the NES version, she could just punch and have the whip. But in this version, she actually can do drop kicks. And for the first time I've seen in the NES versions, Linda can actually pick up the bat. And that's usually reserved for William and Ropar. They'll usually pick the bat up. In the NES version, it's usually just William that pick the bat up. But in this version, Linda picks up a bat and will swing it. Also, they made an improvement on chin. Now, the chins are the guys with the karate guys with the hair and they're shirtless. They actually will break out of, they'll do it on O, but they will break out of your attack when you throw them. They'll actually, if they're not beat up enough, they'll actually do a somersault and flip and land on their feet. Also removed is the, also they have like a jump kick, kind of like a spinning jump kick, and they will use a airball attack, almost so much an attack, but an airball dodge. So if you try to elbow them, instead of them ducking, they'll just spin around and do like a ball roll motion and get out the way. So they did add some new attacks for some of the characters. Same thing with a Bobo. In the NES version, he just slaps you or kicks you. But in this version, a Bobo will grab you, slap you around, and throw you. So they did make some of the villains more challenging than they were in their NES counterpart. So that's one thing that was pretty cool, I thought. So let's talk about the legacy this game left behind. Now, the Double Dragon on the Game Boy didn't sell as much as the NES version, obviously, but it still found an audience. Kids who grew up with the Game Boys in the 1990s often list this as one of their favorite handheld games, and they even got a sequel, Double Dragon 2: The Revenge, for the Game Boy, which improved graphics and added new moves. So today, the Game Boy version is seen as a hidden gem, a well-designed, compact beat-em-up that holds up surprisingly well, and it's a great entry point for younger players and a nostalgic trip for old-school fans. And if you're a collector, the original cartridge is still easy to find, thank God, and it's worth every penny should you find it in the wild. So what's my final take on Double Dragon for the Game Boy? Perfect little bite-sized fun. I do like the fact that they went that extra mile. It could have been a lazy port from the NES to this, but they actually did add a few new things, changed up a few of the levels. The music I wish could be a little more in the right spot. Now, one thing, a little trivial fact is the music when you're in between stages, dun, 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 dun. When you go between missions, that's actually a track. If you listen to the arcade version, if you can have an arcade OST, it actually has some, it's actually longer with a track, and they play that during the, when you're at the boss's headquarters, they actually play that track. So if you next time you play it, take a listen, or if you look through my little gameplay here, if you can hear it, it's kind of, that's what that track is. And also in the throne room, I wish they would have put with Machine Gun Willie, I wish they would have put the Double Dragon theme in there. I'm nitpicking, but other than that, I feel like this is a pretty solid version of Double Dragon for the Game Boy. And handheld Double Dragons, in my opinion, have always held up pretty good because they're perfect. They don't need a lot of buttons, and you don't need a super ton of detail to have a good experience. So overall, thumbs up for Double Dragon for the Game Boy. If you get a chance to see this one in a while, definitely pick it up. And if not, definitely play it because it's definitely worth a quick bite size, maybe 10-15 minutes of fun. That's gonna do it for this one, guys. As always, take care of yourself, protect your inner peace. God bless you, and catch you next video. Thanks for watching.